Thank you for having me here today. I only have one slide just to share with you, and I will share my story with you. Myself and my rare disease have lived in the same body now for 48 years. We've shared a journey together. I've also seen the national health change and grow through that journey, and hopefully I'll share some of my thoughts and feelings as I go on with my talk to you. I will say that this is my experience, and I fully appreciate my experience is not the same as everybody's experience. So yeah, this is my journey and my experiences to date. So I was actually diagnosed with aplastic anemia at the age of 10. It was diagnosed by sheer luck. I'd called my mum with a toothache from school, and her realising that I wasn't really a child that cried a lot or anything, she took me to the doctor. The doctor took one look at me and didn't even worry about my tooth, just said, "You're going to St George's Hospital straight away." So I went down to St George's. St George's took a blood test. Literally days later, I was called out of assembly and rushed down to St George's, where briefly they said to my mum, "Take her home and enjoy her. She's got 3 months to live, if that." I actually was diagnosed with aplastic anemia, which is a bone marrow disease when my bone marrow fully stopped working. I was coming out in big bruises that my mum actually thought I was getting from school. I was breathless, but again, I hadn't said anything to my mum. There was a girl at school that had asthma, and I just used to say, "Oh, I've got asthma like Elizabeth." So that was the way I didn't hide it, but I just didn't talk about it. My life then changed rapidly. I was taken into hospital straight away. I had a blood transfusion with 8 pints of blood. For those of you who don't remember, they were the big bottles containing plasma and cells, and I was on those constantly. For the next 2 years, this photo was me before, this photo is me after. I turned into someone I actually hated. I was on steroids. I was so ill, so sick. I basically was in bed for 2 years. I never went to school, and everyone whispered around me, and even as a child I knew they were saying, "Oh, she hasn't got long," etc., etc. So I decided that, well, no, they're all wrong, they're all talking rubbish. I am perfectly fine and I'm going to get better. And somehow, with a lot of people's help, I did get better. My mum and dad were very much working class people. At that time in the 70s, there was no internet, there was no help or support, there was nothing like Findacure, nothing. You were very much on your own, and they didn't know what to do. Everything the doctor said went, so you never argued with a doctor or a professor. Hammersmith Hospital had given up on my slides. So it was really, there was nowhere to go for my parents. As the years went on, I gradually started to get a little bit better, and the aplastic anemia turned into what's called PNH, paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. And that happens in a lot of patients. And it often, sometimes it starts with aplastic anemia, sometimes it comes on in later life, more or less in adults in their 30s. And at the time, whether or not it was a truism, I was told that I was the youngest person ever to be diagnosed in the world with PNH. PNH is, again, something that is diagnosed. I think 5 people in 1 million are diagnosed with PNH. And you break down red blood cells in your urine. Basically, I pee Merlot when I'm on. That's the best way. And many times I'd go to hospital and the nurse, not understanding, would look in horror and call for a doctor straight away because she'd think it was something absolutely outrageous that was going on. So you break them down at night. So your first urine sample of the morning is normally very, very dark. And as a P&H person, you get used to every time you go to the toilet turning around and looking at your urine, and I still do it to this day. So you just have a habit. P&H is also, it comes with other symptoms, and often these can be much more or less depending on the patient. In me, I had pains in the abdomen. Also, you find it quite difficult to swallow. Bruising, you're prone to blood clots, all sorts of things. And other things, to be honest, that if with a rare disease, and this is one of my big bugbears as a rare disease patient, often you have the hospital that diagnose the main symptoms, but there are loads of other symptoms that come with a rare disease. And only after many years do I realise, things like why I kept getting, as a woman, thrush, or why I kept getting depression, and all of these symptoms, because they aren't the symptoms that the doctors want to treat, aren't addressed. And those are something that have affected me in later life. So the fact that I couldn't have children, nobody ever talked about that with me in my early years, and so it was just shoved under the carpet. But it comes at you later in life, and it's not something that anyone ever really addresses. So the years went on, and I lived off of blood transfusions. As it stands, I've had over 300 pints of blood today. I worked. I was determined to so-called live a normal life. I hate that word normal, but it was what I aspired to be. I never told anybody about my condition. The only people that really knew about my condition were my parents and maybe very close friends. I also lived through an era where AIDS was prevalent, and at that time, you didn't talk about blood conditions. I spoke about it once, and someone said to me, AIDS, you've got AIDS. And so you quickly shut up. And not that anything, it was just the prejudice that lived in our society. I also lived through the time when we received blood that's been talked about recently in the news from the US. But again, I was very lucky, at least, that I used to have wash pack cells. So I think that was something why that I wasn't affected by that, thank goodness. So as the years went on, I worked. I took myself, some people that I found out much later in life have never worked with my condition. But I did. I worked. I was actively involved in heavy global corporate roles. I never told a job. I never told anyone that I had a rare disease. And the reason for that is, unlike today, there is no understanding, and I would still argue that there is no understanding. It doesn't matter what the law says, that people can, not discriminate against you, but the fact is they do. And I've recently had the need to put on certain job applications, and I know for a fact that the fact that I put down something like P&H has had an impact on whether I get a role or not. And I even had it with, unfortunately, if anyone's here today, Alexion, and I even had it with Alexion, one of Alexion's suppliers, believe it or not. So I lived my life in secret, pretty much, and it wasn't until a visit to St George's, and what I used to call one of my beautiful doctors down there, Dr. Ella Boutte, and she happened to say to me one day, Susie, would you like to go on a trial? And bear in mind as well that I was told, and my parents were told, that this disease was totally incurable. There would never be a cure. The life expectancy when you're diagnosed is, you're lucky if you live 5 years. And also that because of all the blood transfusions you have to have, it has an impact on all of your organs. So over time, your organs degenerate, etc. And so, the life expectancy isn't very good. So I went to St George's. Dr. Ella Boutte said, would you like to go on a trial? We'd like to put you on this drug. So I said, yes, where do I sign? Because I've always been open to everything. So it was a case of, where do I sign? And again, that was the only time, my employer at the time, I actually told them, but I didn't even tell them the truth. I just passed it. I said, oh, look, I've got some internal problems. I'm going to have to turn up once a week at the hospital. And so they said, fine. I went to the hospital. I had to give my time, which at that time was huge to me, because I still had to pay for my life. And once again, society doesn't realise that, or support people with rare diseases, I would argue, because, you know, no one pays my mortgage, no one does anything. I had to support myself. And so I had to continue working. I went on the trial. My body totally rejected what is now known today as Soliris. It seemed like every antibody in me just totally went haywire and rejected this drug and said, no, you're not going to put this inside yourself. And so I was hospitalised for, I think, a couple of days, and I thought, that's it, they're never going to try this drug with me. But no, they did. They started giving me a weeny bit of steroid like you do in chemo, until my body got used to the drug. And the actual thing that goes wrong in PNH is that my red blood cell, which they discovered obviously many years later, doesn't hold a protein, a complement, and that complement breaks down. So in you, your blood cells would last in you for 4 months. In me, they last 2 days. But there was also a challenge with the drug, because the drug company knew, Alexion, that if they put people on this trial, that the possibility, if it failed, we could go far worse and lose a lot more blood. So there was a lot at stake. The other interesting thing, and I noticed that it's been discussed here, the trial was driven by an American company, but from the UK. And so it was kind of revolutionary, because it was a wonderful Professor Hillman in Leeds that was driving it and working with the company to, find the patients. The drug had originally been developed for rheumatoid arthritis, but what Alexion had discovered was that as a small drug company, they were not going to, it had failed looking at rheumatoid arthritis, and I think another kidney complaint, but they weren't going to make money in that field. But there was an opportunity to make money in the rare disease area. And again, this was kind of strange, because when I was first diagnosed, I was told that you would never get interest, drug companies wouldn't look to do anything, because rare diseases would earn them no money. So this was a complete turnaround in the business model, and Alexion noticed that there was a niche in that market. So just moving on, but if I was to tell you that Alexion shares went up 600-fold, and that when the drug actually came to market, their profits exceeded Apple or Salesforce.com. That's how much this drug has made them. It's the most expensive drug in the world. And I know the lady was talking about getting funding. So with it, and myself and now people who I've met, finally I only met other people with my condition when I was in my 40s, there you carry a sense of guilt, because you think, why do I deserve to be on the most expensive drug in the world? It costs the NHS $500,000 a year to keep me on that drug. So there's all sorts of ramifications that come with it. The one thing I would say, and another gentleman raised about getting drugs through trials, that is key. One of the things that I think that maybe through the feedback today, Alexion did very well, was they totally proved how this changed our lives. So for the first time in my life, I lived off of a hemoglobin that was half of what you would live off of. And suddenly I was pink. Pink, by the way, is my favourite colour. And I was suddenly pink from being yellow all my life, and I'd never had such a high hemoglobin. Even though it's still lower than average, I'd never had such a high hemoglobin. So they were able to prove that in every instance, the drug had such an impact on every patient's life, and that was key into getting the funding, first via the FDA and then through us in the UK, and then the funding through NICE as well. So the drug now has moved on. I was on an intravenous drug every 2 weeks since 2007. I am now on another trial by which the drug spaces out, and I'm given the intravenous drug every 8 weeks. And so that is going through the process. That is now going through, I think it's just been approved by the FDA. It's now going through for funding here. So fingers crossed I will get that. The other thing that I'd like to say, the message that I'd like to give other people as well, living with a condition, a rare disease, not all rare diseases do show you have an arm or a leg, or you have a physical sign that something is wrong with you. And that is a very difficult thing to live with. I get breathless, I get headaches, I get tired, I get irritable, but they could just be down, because we as humans, we look at people and we expect kind of perfection, and we expect you. So in our own minds, even myself, we don't have any patience for someone. So it's also very difficult, because I can't walk up to somebody and say, I've got P&H, so I want you to have patience with me. And that's a very difficult thing. It's even a very difficult thing for my partner. I was recently basically knocked out with the flu bug that was going around, and to me, I was dying. I was literally dying, like many people, but it did hit me worse, and for the last 6 weeks I was in bed. But it's almost like people don't want to recognize that you're ill. They don't want to see it in you. So these are all the psychological things, I would say, sometimes that you live with. It's not just the physical, it's the mental. And the mental side of the condition, I don't think is looked at enough by drug companies. Even when you're on trial, I don't think the mental side enough is taken into consideration. I don't think as the drug companies, I know they're beginning to get much better, but getting involved with patients as stakeholders, because, as I said, I've had this condition now for 48 years. I think I'm pretty much an expert in my condition. Excuse me, but I get idiot people phone me up and ask me stupid questions, marketing questions on behalf of the drug companies. I should have input, or other people should have input into what questions are being asked. And I don't have a lot of patience anymore for people that don't have the knowledge to ask me the right questions. And that's another area of frustration, and I think should be taken into consideration. There's an opportunity for drug companies to start hiring people outside of the medical industry. Yes, I appreciate you've got to have all the degrees that God sends, but you've also got to have commercial acumen, and you've got to have some just basic sensibilities to be able to understand. And I think that's where the medical profession and the NHS and the commercial side fall down. Never the twain, they just don't meet. So I think that's another area that needs to be looked at. Having said all that, and I think someone else said today, I've been lucky enough to travel a lot in my job, and as such, I've travelled the world. I would not live in any other country other than this, because the NHS has been the most. It has its critics, I know it has its challenges, huge challenges, and I understand those, but it is the most wonderful organisation in the world. I get frustrated when I hear otherwise. I realise there are many things that need to be put right in the NHS, but without it, I would not be alive today. And for that, I am eternally grateful to have been born and brought up in this country. So, thank you.